During the winter of 1978, Britain was buried under thick snow and a blizzard of strikes. In London, garbage began piling up on the sidewalks, reaching the heights of the brick walls. The paralysis reached every corner of society. In Liverpool, the dead were turned away from cemeteries because the gravediggers had thrown down their shovels and walked off the job. This wasn't local to the UK. In the United States, consumers faced severe shortages, with gas stations limiting sales to 10 gallons per customer as the economy stalled. These scenes marked the visible collapse of the economic rulebook that had rebuilt the world after the Second World War. The old methods were failing to keep the lights on. That rulebook was the work of John Maynard Keynes. His ideology dominated the post-war era, teaching that governments could and should manage the economy by adjusting their spending. This graph, the Phillips curve, was the foundation of that system. It showed a trade-off. When unemployment was low, inflation was higher. When unemployment was high, inflation stayed low. The government's playbook was to use the curve like a thermostat. To lower unemployment, they would spend more and accept a small, predictable rise in inflation as a necessary cost. But in the 1970s, the math broke. As newspaper headlines reported 2 million people out of work, inflation continued to climb. The trade-off had vanished. Both numbers were high at the same time. This became known as stagflation, economic stagnation combined with high inflation. If the Phillips curve no longer predicted reality, the entire justification for government intervention was effectively gone. Milton Friedman, a determined economist from the Chicago School, argued that stagflation wasn't a mystery. He believed it was the direct result of the government meddling too much in the market. Friedman focused on monetarism. Imagine an island with 10 pineapples and 5 $1 bills. At $1 each, bills change hands twice yearly, the velocity of circulation. Print 5 more dollars, keep velocity constant, and $10 generates $20 of transactions. National income doubles. But because the island still only has 10 pineapples, the only way to reach $20 is for the price of each pineapple to jump to $2. Friedman's point was simple. Printing money doesn't create wealth, it creates inflation. If printing money only raises prices, why did the old Keynesian stimulus ever seem to work? Friedman called the effect the money illusion. In the short term, workers see their wages go up, and thinking they are richer, they work harder and produce more. For a brief moment, unemployment actually drops. But as the prices of goods rise to match the new money supply, workers realize their real wages haven't changed. They stop working the extra hours, and the economy slides back to its original level of employment. Only now, inflation is higher. Friedman compared this to an alcoholic taking a shot of whiskey to cure a hangover. The government pumps up the economy for a temporary high, but society is left with a permanent inflation problem and no real gain in jobs. Friedman argued that human policymakers are too slow to anticipate economic shifts. By the time they react, the situation has often changed, meaning their attempts to fine-tune the economy actually cause the very crashes they try to prevent. He proposed a radical fix: remove the power of central banks to decide how much money is in the economy. Instead, he wanted a system that increased the money supply at a steady, fixed rate of 3% a year to match the natural growth of production. His insistence that the government should step back made him a polarizing figure. He faced constant protests over his meeting with Augusto Pinochet, the Chilean dictator who used Friedman's free market theories while violently suppressing political opponents. Despite the controversy, Friedman's promise of a stable, self-regulating economy without the threat of runaway inflation became the new goal for leaders across the West. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher became Britain's prime minister, and shortly after, Ronald Reagan took the U.S. presidency. Both were committed to Friedman's monetarist goal of crushing inflation by restricting the money supply. In practice, however, managing the exact amount of money in a modern economy proved difficult. Central banks struggled to hit their targets, and the transition was painful. While these policies did eventually bring inflation down, the sudden restriction of money made the recession of the early 80s deeper, causing unemployment to spike as businesses struggled to adapt. This difficulty led Thatcher and Reagan to shift their focus from the demand for money to the supply of goods. This became supply-side economics, the theory that if the government can't steer the economy with spending, It should instead remove the obstacles, like taxes and regulations, that prevent businesses from producing more. Strict monetarism faded, but Friedman changed the default setting of global economics. He replaced the Keynesian pilot with a vision of a self-correcting system. Today, the prevailing assumption is that stability comes not from active government steering, but from setting predictable rules and letting the market find its own level.